What is going on, guys? DragonTamerBlayde here, back with some more Elder Scrolls Legends, and today we're going to be talking about the balance patch changes that are coming in patch 2.8. The date for this patch is probably going to be sometime around Thursday of this week. I don't think we got the exact date, but usually patches drop around Thursdays. I think CVH had mentioned that as well. But it's coming around Thursday, and we got a couple changes today. We're going to break them down. Before I get into the breakdown, I want to preface this by saying I agree with all three changes. I'm going to try my best to stay positive in this video, but there's a chance that my thoughts and overall reaction could come across somewhat negative. So I want to start by saying I agree with all three changes. I agree that all three changes needed to happen, and I agree with the level at which they happened. I think these are perfectly fine nerfs to these specific cards. So I want to get that out there first, and then I'll talk through the rest of what I'm talking through as we go. So first things first, Siege Catapult is changing from a 5-5 to a 4-4. I had talked about this in my previous video about cards that could see nerfs. I saw some people talk about how they think Siege Catapult should have been a 5-4. I could see the argument for that as well. I think that would have also been mostly fine. I've seen people say that this is just strictly worse than Mournhold Trader now. I don't agree with that at all. I think both cards will be good in their own way with similar drawbacks. While 4-4 obviously isn't as good as a 5-5, Siege Catapult's quote-unquote downside is nowhere near as bad of a downside as, or as much of a hindrance as you may think it is, or maybe it once was. The ability to silence it, you can still use your skeleton dog on this thing. Filling up a lane is so easy, especially if you have the ring. You can play 1-drop into 2-drop into 2-2-drops and have this thing active on turn 3. Or even 2-drop into 1 and 2. There's so many different combinations where this card gets active on turn 2 or 3. So it's really not that big of a deal. And add in the ability to silence it, give it guard, all of those things. I still think this card's actually probably better than Mournhold Trader, especially in an aggressive deck. They both can give you initial boosts, and maybe Mournhold Trader gets going easier, but Siege Catapult's downside is not as bad as the downside of Mournhold Trader. So I think this is a perfectly fine nerf. Purple decks in general, with their overstated cards, have been a problem for the last couple months. Doing things like Siege Catapult with Ward Crafters, or with Haunting Spirit into Mammoth into Bleak Coast Troll. That's just more than most decks can handle in the early game. And not counting whatever color you splash. Like I said, it could be Sorcerer with some blue splash, or Warrior with the red splash. These purple cards were just like too much. And I still even think that there may be a point where we have to come look at cards like Haunting Spirit, Mammoth, Bleak Coast, maybe even Wardcrafter. All of those cards, there still needs to obviously be some good early game cards. But purple has such a critical mass of them almost that I would not be surprised if we have to come back and visit these cards again. So those decks getting even a little bit slower, or removing a little bit of their high roll potential. Because if you played against a opponent with like Siege Catapult and Skeleton Dog in hand on turn 1, that could oftentimes be enough to just end the game. Then you can't get past the Catapult while they just stack smaller threats behind the guarded Catapult, and then the whole game just kind of snowballs from there. That'll still be possible. It's still going to be hard to get through a 4-6 with guard, as much as it was to get through a 5-7 with guard. So the card's not getting much worse. It's just now you can Lightning Bolt and unbuffed Siege Catapult, and most 3-drops and all 4-drops will be able to trade with Siege Catapult, where that wasn't the case before. And that sounds wild to say, but Siege Catapult could eat everything up to like 5 drops with almost no issue whatsoever. That's just wild. So the fact that it's going to be brought down, and instead of needing a 4 or a 5 drop, and now it'll need a 3 or a 4 drop more than likely, that gives you that extra turn earlier when you can answer this. Or like 2 weaker 2 drops can now kill a Siege Catapult, whereas previously you were probably going 3 for 1. I like this change. I think this is a good change. We'll see if it was enough to kind of knock those purple-based aggro decks down a peg, and they should at least be down a little bit, but I don't think the decks got much worse. Next up, we've got Enduro Mastermind. This card got the nuke. Like, nuked real bad. Enduro Mastermind went from a 3-cost 2-1 with the ability to look at the top 2 cards from your deck, draw one and discard the other, to just draw a card. Now, I want to start this again. I'm happy to see this card go. As much as it's a great enabler in a lot of meme decks, like Item Sorcerer, Slay Scout, any purple-based combo deck, Enduro Mastermind does some great things. However, this deck, or this card, is just everywhere. Slay Warrior abused this card. Telvanni and Tribunal abused this card. This card is just, it was too good. It did too much filtering for almost no downside. Paying 3 costs for this was fine. In fact, the fact that this even had a body was fantastic for some of these slower decks, enabling it to filter their deck and continue to fight for the board to keep your threats down. So this card was just way too good. However, Jesus Christ, did this card get murdered? You compare it to Thieves Guild Recruit, which is a 2-cost 1/2 that has the same ability, but also the potential for a cost reduction if the card costs 7 or more. Like, holy crap, this card is dead. Part of it had to die because A, it was too good, and B, Odurner and Necromancer is still a thing, and they seem dead set on not nerfing Necromancer, so they're gonna just keep looking at things that Necromancer pulls back instead of looking at the Necromancer. That's fine. That's their choice, whatever they prefer. But maybe this card also was doing too well in decks that didn't contain Necromancer. But I'm still not convinced that we won't have to come back and look at Necromancer again. Overall, this card is completely dead. I'm not sad to see it go, though. A lot of the same decks that were running Mastermind are going to be okay. Slay Warrior is going to miss it because they don't have many great replacements. Telvanni and Tribunal still have some decent draw available to them. Telvanni and Tribunal can just run Palace Conspirator. They're still fine running camels and just pulling back the camels. This will hurt those decks a little bit, but nowhere near enough. They're going to be just fine. So overall, my opinion on this nerf is A, the card is dead for the most part. B, this nerf, besides Slay Warrior, which it does hurt a considerable amount, this is another one of those nerfs where it hurts meme decks and fun decks and some tier 3 and lower decks way more than it hurts the actual decks that relied on this card outside of potentially Slay Warrior. Like, my Slay Scout deck misses losing Enduro Mastermind way more than Tribunal or Telvanni will miss losing Enduro Mastermind. Or Item Sorcerer will miss losing this card way more than Telvanni or Tribunal will miss losing this card. And that may be a testament to how strong three-color decks are, and maybe some other balance and design issues that I don't really want to get into on a tangent in this video, but it kind of seems to be a trend lately where in a half-hearted attempt to target some of the best decks, they're killing a ton of fun decks or severely hurting a lot of fun decks, and those best decks are coming out relatively unscathed. I do think the combination of this change and the next one we're going to talk about does hurt Slay Warrior quite a bit. So this may be the rare exception where a top deck actually gets hurt. However, I think Tribunal is still more powerful than Slay Warrior, and Tribunal gets hit only with this and barely hit at all, I would say. So again, this is another nerf that I agree with. I'm happy to see this card kind of die. However, it puzzles me that Odurner wasn't looked at. It puzzles me that we continue to keep losing fun decks at the expense of meta decks. I don't even want to say meta decks, but certain decks that are too good. But yeah, overall I'm fine with the Enduro Mastermind nerf. Next up, we've got Slay abilities, and specifically they're looking at Sword of the Inferno, but also look at other cards moving forward. Slay abilities have been nerfed as a whole, where if you kill yourself with a Slay ability, you will no longer self-trigger a Slay on yourself. So the example they give is Arcane Venom Tongue using Sword of the Inferno. You will not ramp twice. You'll only ramp once from killing your opponent. Same with the Falkreath Defiler. If it kills itself with the sword, it will not get a free resurrection from killing itself. I think this is a fine change. As much as it kind of hurts me inside because I love Slay as an ability, completely makes sense that you shouldn't get a reward for killing yourself. So it's another thing that hurts Ramp Slay Warrior. It hurts other things more minor, like Slay Archer, which not a lot of people play. I think this was a kind of a common sense change, and it's kind of the kind of thing where when you were first introduced to Slay as a mechanic, I think most people would have assumed you couldn't slay yourself. It seems kind of counterintuitive. So it's kind of a clearing up of the game rules in order to match what common sense would say in that situation. So it's another fine nerf, and since this is the only card that you can currently just kill yourself with, you will be getting a full soul gem refund for Sword of the Inferno. So now, you may say, Blade, you sound very positive. Why? What's the problem? So I already started, I went into it a little bit. We need to stop nerfing fun decks because we're afraid to nerf the good decks too much. Like Tribunal and Telvanni, untouched. The decks are fine. A lot of the heavily red-based aggro decks, Crusader, we could see the old aggro warrior back a bit. Halalu, any other pick your regular aggro deck, even Sorcerer. Catapult getting nerf is going to hurt those cards, or hurt those decks, I should say. But all of those decks are still going to be fine. And I talked about it in a tweet that I put out the other day. The developer strategy for nerfs is to target nerfs at a specific top deck or two, without actually bringing down the power level of those decks all too much. And overall, they want to have ladder remain the same. However, when ladder's been a mostly miserable experience for the better part of the last year and a half, and the best decks have remained largely changed for the better part of the last year and a half, you need bigger sweeping changes, especially if your newly released cards aren't having the impact on your game that you may have hoped. Enter something like Slay Rage Warrior. That deck was a high roll machine that basically relied on getting lucky at the right times in order to do stupid things and win the game in these huge swing plays. It's not a type of deck that I particularly enjoyed, as much as I love Slay as an effect. Rage Warrior just did a lot of stupid things. I'm not super sad to see the deck get hurt quite a bit. However, that deck kind of rose in popularity because after the Conscription nerf, Conscription was still really good. So people were just playing a ton of Rage decks, and out of the Rage decks and the release of Sword of the Inferno, Rage Warrior, Slay Warrior was kind of born from that. And also, Slay Rage Warrior was one of the few decks that could stand up to Tribunal that doesn't, like, kind of god draw them, and also has enough staying power and burst healing to survive against aggro. So what's the common thread there? A new card plus the ladder never changing birthed this other kind of stupid deck that kind of only existed because of A, kind of busted combos that shouldn't exist in the game, and B, the inability to change the ladder from the way it's been for the last year and a half. That same argument goes into things like, why is there so much aggro on the ladder? There's so much aggro on the ladder because at all times there is some incredibly greedy, like borderline busted slow deck that forces you to try to beat them down, because if you don't have them beat by turn 5 or 6, they're going to ice storm you, or they're going to do some other crazy stupid thing, and you instantly lose. So you have no chance with a mid-range deck, and you kind of need to high roll with an aggro deck, and that's why Catapult started gaining so much popularity, because that 5 power was what you needed that early to be able to beat these decks down. That's why you needed to get that 5 power on the board against Telvanni Conscription, because if you didn't, they were going to start playing Ice Storms with Vipers and Oderner Necromancers into their Blackhand Messengers and all this other crazy stuff that Telvanni can do, or Tribunal's just going to start removal until you're out of stuff, and then they just start dropping 10 drops every single turn, and then you have no hope there. The game is consistently ruled by like borderline broken greedy decks that no other slow deck can survive against, so you can't play a regular Control Monk, because if you come against Tribunal, bam, you lose, and your regular Control Monk probably isn't going to stand up all too well to these hyper aggro monstrosities that probably wouldn't exist if we had a more mid-range and kind of more sliding scale of overall strength of decks on the ladder. Our ladder has just consistently been super hyper red-based aggro and kind of transitioned into purple-based aggro because you don't die to as much early removal and you just need to push damage as quickly as possible. So that's one side of the ladder. And that's kind of been birthed because on the other side of the ladder, traditionally we've had Telvanni Conscription, which just removes everything you play, continuously has stuff on the board, pulls stuff back from the graveyard. If it wasn't 5/5 giant bats, it turned into Odona Necromancer, filtering for more ramp into Conscription. And then at that point, even a 12-cost Conscription is still giving you like 25 magicka worth of value. So unless you're playing something equally greedy, you're going to lose. So people started playing Rage decks as kind of a midway in between the two. However, regular Rage decks lose to aggro, so they had to find a way to do something equally stupid to beat aggro. So Rage Warrior was born because they had burst healing and ways to pull stuff back from the discard and do other crazy things. And then Slay Warrior started playing like 7 different one-ofs as their late game because Tribunal was there to cast all of their threats into time, or use Piercing Twilights to remove stuff from their discard pile, or Hallowed Death Priest to transform the best card in their hand into a mummy. The game is just ruled by stupid things right now. all around the ladder is just dumb decks doing dumb things. And these nerfs do a tiny bit. They do a tiny bit to address some of those problems. However, and I keep saying it, and it's kind of where I went to a kind of a tangent on Twitter. I keep building myself up to be let down because when I hear balance patch coming, I get these kind of lofty hopes in my head that the developers are going to have a kind of heavy-handed nerf buff cycle to actually inject some life into the game. And then over and over again, you get some kind of minor nerf that has a minuscule effect on the meta, and we're off to 6 more months of playing the same decks that we've been playing. And I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound stupid. I think we need to look towards Hearthstone as a way of how to handle this properly. I've talked about it a little bit on Twitter. I think I've talked about it a little bit on the channel. Hearthstone used to be horrible with balance changes coming way too late, not really doing much. Occasionally they'd kill a card, but not kill a deck. However, now they've been much more frequent. They've been much more aggressive. They're not afraid to admit they made a mistake with a card and just change it or rotate it out. Hearthstone's showing the right way to handle the health of your game. I still don't agree with a lot of their card decisions and their design choices, but they're showing that they take balance and stuff like that seriously. And I have to give them credit for that, and I think it's a lesson that I wish that Legends would take. Don't be afraid to make these changes. Which is going to lead me into my pseudo-final point here. This balance change is kind of leading me to 2 trains of thought, and I'm leaning more towards one way, so I'll tell you the way I'm leaning first. It's telling me that we have to have an expansion coming much sooner rather than later. Like, I would not be surprised if we have new cards within the next month and a half. Like an announcement at PAX East and maybe a release 2 weeks or so after that. I don't have a hard date. Don't take that as a hard date. That is me guessing. I have no inside knowledge. But to have a patch that, even by our standards, is even less impactful than usual tells me that I'm hoping that the developers are saying, we have new cards on the way that I think will affect the ladder, so let's not nerf things too soon because we have these new cards on the way. That's what I sincerely hope and think is going on. Whether those new cards have an impact or not, I don't know. The last 3 batches of new cards we've gotten have done nothing, so it still remains to be seen if a new batch of cards will actually do anything. But I'm at least open to the idea of giving them the opportunity to have the cards do something. Because the alternative is they're just tone deaf, there's no cards coming soon, and they're fine with the meta being the same for 2 years straight. I don't want that to be the case, and I don't think that's the case. Although I do think there's a pretty severe lack of listening to the player base going on right now. But that's a different problem for another time. I'm sorry for this kind of 10-minute tangent on the ladder and why it's consistently been stupid and balance change is not doing enough. And it kind of overshadows what I think is 3 intelligent and fine nerfs, but I just don't think they did anywhere near enough. Maybe I remain to be seen if I'm wrong. I could very well be wrong. But I think we're still headed towards a meta that's dominated by Tribunal. Telvanni will probably see a more of an uptick. It never really went away, but I think we'll see it even more now again. And then we'll go back to seeing, Crusaders and Sorcerers and Warriors. I don't think much is changing overall. So fingers crossed that we've got new cards on the way soon. Overall, I'd give this balance patch like a D+, C- kind of thing. Like, the nerfs were correct and the nerfs were fine. It's just, overall, it's not enough. And the health of the game is hurting. And I think we need to take some lessons from Hearthstone. And I never thought I would say that about this game, but I think we need to take some lessons from Hearthstone. But yeah, that's going to be it for now, guys. Let me know what you guys think down below of the changes, the balance patch. Let me know what you guys think. If you also want to comment on my little rant, tell me if you agree, disagree, whatever. I'd be glad to hear your guys' thoughts down below as well. Yeah, that's going to be it for now, guys. As always, thank you all very much for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.